Hey folks, welcome to Josh's Worst Nightmare Oddcast presented by Denver Horror Collective. I'm your host, Josh Schlossberg, author of Maline and Charwood, coming August 21st, surveying the dark landscape of biological horror fiction. For this episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with Len M. Ruth. Len M. Ruth is the author of The Pull, Rachel's Apocalypse Diary 1 and 2, and Tales of the Doomed. His horror has been published in the anthology Satan Rides Your Daughter and featured in the Flash Fiction Forum. You can find his latest novel, The Unrecovered, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Welcome to my nightmare, Len.
Thanks for having me.
Really glad to have you here. So, folks who are aware or those who aren't, I will explain that on Josh's Worst Nightmare. I invite on horror authors to talk about an aspect of biological horror, which I define as living creatures and vital processes relevant in some way to their writing or interest. This episode, we're talking about what we're calling the biology of pleasure, that whole realm. So when I asked you for a topic, what interests you about that?
It's the interplay of pleasure and pain. Like, at what point pleasure becomes painful? Are they separate systems in the body? Are they the same system that like goes over a mountaintop and plummets into hell on the other side? Yeah.
Well, sorry, keep going.
No, that was something that I wanted to talk about. I wanted it I was picturing like a global pandemic apocalypse and like what would happen if the entire population, like if they didn't die, like there's not zombies or anything like that, but like they became so overwhelmed by pleasure that it became painful and it like essentially paralyzed them. I'm like, I really like the idea of that. I like the idea of like not being able to control your body. Like that's like the worst kind of body horror to me. And there are a couple of everyday examples of that I sort of dove into a little bit, like trying to figure out how to put this topic in the book. I'm like, well, what is there in everyday life like that we can think of where there's like that pleasure pain threshold where like this is good, oh, it's bad, like, and the one has to do with sexual pleasure. Right. I think that like both men and women can identify with like going from good to bad in that way, usually like at the tail end of the proceedings, if you will. Sure. And the other one is tickling, which I thought was like, I didn't think of it. And then when I was researching the topic, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, and there are a couple of things that those share in common. And it all happens in the brain. Like a lot of this stuff happens in the brain. It's separate neurological impulses going to separate areas of the brain. But like, what if those were combined? What if that's so like tickling, for instance, tickling, so there's two kinds of tickling, right? There's like light tickling, like, you know, if you touch someone's skin with a feather, and then there's like the heavy tickling, like if you think of like somebody's belly or somebody's side, like, you know, going like this, like that's a heavier tickling. When you do that one, it stimulates pain nerves as well as like the pleasure centers. So it's like it's going to the hypothalamus and it's going to the prefrontal cortex. I think I have that right. If I don't have it right, forgive me, but like I know that it's stimulating those pain nerves. And I'm like, so when you're tickling someone like that, like that's why you want it to stop, because it's actually triggering a pleasure response and a pain response. I'm like, what if we just multiply that by like, you know, 1,000,000?
Yeah, I love that concept. So you said you included this in a book?
So the idea was, it's funny, to do like to get really horrible for me, like I include what I like to call junk science. So it's like it's the opposite of plausible deniability. It's like it could happen, and the only people who know absolutely that it could not happen would be experts in the field. So it's like I dig down to the edge of my understanding of the topic, and I'm like, there it is. So like for in the Unrecovered, there's a protein that gets added to a flu virus. And so like I did a deep dive on flu viruses too, and those are pretty cool. It's basically RNA, genetic material, with protein coatings. So there's two proteins, the H and the N. So like if you think of like the famous flu that we've all heard of, right? Spanish flu, H1N1.
Yep.
The H is the one that binds the virus to your cell, and it's like a key, and your cell's like, oh, that protein has a key. Come on in here. So it takes that genetic material in, it copies it, and then the N is the one that's like, oh, we're good. I got all of my replication done. See you later. So the N's kind of like a knife. It cuts that loose after the viruses have been replicated. I'm like, what if we just tacked one more protein on there? What if it's this protein that's been engineered to produce a pleasure response? So your body does its thing, right? It can knock out the virus, but you still have all of this genetic material in the body. This protein gets into the brain, overstimulates. So like the victims of this flu in the book, like have like a heroin response. Like if you think of like heroin addicts that like go on the nod, right? There's so much pleasure happening up here that this exterior sensory inputs shut down, and the pleasure is all happening in the brain behind the scenes. But like, what if you overstimulated the brain in that way? And one of the things that happens when you overstimulate the brain that way is that the cells die. It's actually it's cell death from the actual the nerve cells. And that's what makes addiction. That's why like addicts, like you need more and more, and you get less and less from it, because you keep killing the nerve receptors. You're overstimulating them and they're dying. And now you can't get the pleasure from the amount of stuff that you put in, because you don't have the nerve cells left. And you do regenerate over time. Right. That's why like addicts will go into treatment to clean up, right? To get that tolerance down. The brain is regenerating, creating new nerve cells, or finding new nerve cells in a different area. But as soon as you dig back in and you start overstimulating them, you start killing them again. And it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot in that. So that's definitely a fascinating topic. So what I think about a lot of stuff. Well, first of all, you weren't really citing junk science. You were citing legitimate science in your
Well, it is legitimate science. So here's the junk part. It's like saying adding a protein to a flu virus is saying like, if I cut my arm off, my children will be born without an arm, right?
Fair enough.
You're saying I'm adding a protein to a virus, and now it's going to replicate and always have this protein on all the new viruses. But like, it's at such a micro level that like most readers are going to be like, all right, like I can get down with that, right?
Sure. Suspension of disbelief, even if you do know that. But yeah, I mean, that would have sounded fine to me, but I see what you're saying in terms of like actual replication of the viruses and the evolving of it. Maybe it wouldn't work that way, but who cares? It's fiction. So
right.
Yeah. And it's got enough science there where you're not just making up nonsense. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. I think about what is more incapacitating. Is it pleasure or is it pain? Because pain, yeah, if it's terrible, you can't, but it's almost like we resist pain. Pain can be a motivator, all sorts of stuff, but pleasure, you just shut down, you bliss out. If I were a evil terrorist trying to destroy another population, maybe my first thought would be, how do I make them all feel pain? But really, if you really want to lay them out, make them all feel pleasure all the time. It's a brilliant concept.
Right. I was like, what if, because I feel like in science fiction, we tend to like dump on the armed forces a lot, like this secret army weapon. And while I hate that trope, it's really convenient. So I want to say like later in those series, the armed forces are the heroes. But in this particular instance, yes, they weaponized it but like in the kindest possible way, because no one is the bad guy in their own story. Right. So of course, while they're thinking this up, they're like, well, how can we incapacitate our enemies in the kindest possible way without all the bloodshed? We just make them happy.
Yeah.
If they're so happy, they don't want to fight. They're just sitting in the foxhole, like, hey,
Right.
just get them all stoned, man.
Yeah.
And then, like, of course, I just took it to the absolute, extreme of that. Like,
That's a cool idea, because both pleasure and pain, it's a loss of control. And it's something that if it gets to either extreme, it's really unsettling. And we don't really like it when it goes too far. I mean, people like having orgasms, but a forever orgasm, that would be torture.
while I was looking at some of this stuff, there's a thing, you can look it up like on YouTube or whatever. There's a video of a woman who was hospitalized for having a 4-hour orgasm.
I heard of that. I'm not admitting, don't search my search history. I didn't look it up, but yeah.
Well, no, the poor lady, like, it was all, PG rated, but it was like, oh man, can you imagine? Like,
It's too much of a good thing.
Exactly. Yeah, and what was I? All right, hang on a second.
All right.
Did I talk about oxytocin already?
No, that's on my list though. So we can go right into that. Yeah.
So, when we talk about like that threshold in sexual relations, right, from the end of sex, where it goes from pleasure to overstimulation to like, is that pain? I mean, it's certainly really uncomfortable. And it turns out one of the hormones released from sexual activity is oxytocin, and everyone thinks of it like that's the love hormone or whatever, but it also is it's like the MSG of hormones. Like, whatever you've got going on, it's going to enhance that. So it's like you releasing that oxytocin, and if there's still physical stimulation happening, it's going to like just magnify it to the point where, all right. And yeah, there's the loss of control aspect, but like, I have not yet been able to find evidence that you're firing pain neurons necessarily. Right. But I thought that it was interesting that oxytocin isn't just the love hormone, just like the pleasure hormone. It's an enhancer, and it enhances whatever's happening. So like it's magnifying that sensation.
Interesting. Sure. So yeah, an intensifier. Right. Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, when we get pain sensations, it's the body usually telling us, stop doing that. But when we get pleasure, it's usually the body saying, keep doing that. But then, of course, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that study with the rats who are hitting a button to get cocaine, and then they starve to death or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the things where I was like, when I was putting the stuff together for the book, I'm like, that's it exactly, like that right there. And that's how in the book, that's how people died, was they starved to death or they died of thirst, because they just
yeah, feels too good. Why bother doing anything else? Yeah.
Well, one thing that's interesting, at least in the human biology, and it's where addiction happens, is that there's a Dr. Lustig. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He's got some very interesting data on the difference between pleasure and happiness.
Okay.
And there's this weird cycle that happens where, okay, so pleasure is dopamine. Think of like, right. We're talking in general terms here, like not exactly, but like just like a very simplified idea. If pleasure is dopamine, then happiness is serotonin.
Okay.
And what serotonin does is like, hey, that feels good, but I'm cool. Like, we can stop that now. I've got what I need.
Fulfillment, like you're fulfilled.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Where dopamine's like, that's good, give me more. Give me more. Yeah. And serotonin downregulates dopamine, right? So like naturally the way that works is like, I'm getting it, I'm getting it, I'm getting it. And then there's serotonin down regulates the dopamine, and that's it. You're good. Like that's a natural cycle. But cortisol, the stress hormone, down regulates serotonin. So if you're stressed, which like I feel like in modern society, we're all perpetually stressed in one way or another. Mm-hmm. Rushing around in traffic, drinking energy drinks, just like at this high level. And there's a lot of cortisol happening there. So anytime you do a behavior, a dopamine seeking behavior, whether it's like, and there's so many ways to be addicted now, whether it's sugar or caffeine or nicotine or hard drugs or like whatever, it's easy, you know, anything that feels good that does that dopamine rush. Social media apparently is big on that like sort of dopamine rush. And you have high levels of cortisol, you're not going to get the serotonin to come in and be like, settle down, we're happy. You just want more and more and more and more. So that was the other thing, like that protein in that virus had to also be a down regulator of serotonin, where it's just like, you're doing the dopamine, you're overstimulating, you're killing nerve cells, and then you're in this coma and you eventually die.
Right. When you seek out too much of that pleasure, you become less happy. That's the whole life of the addict. So it's almost like the chasing of it is what can destroy you. So I think that's a really apropos. And apropos for today, did you mean to have some sort of social commentary in your story?
I didn't start out, you know, the one that was interesting to me ended up being a really small factor in the book. And that was, okay, so let's say that you're there and you've got this nation of people like that are for a certain amount of time who are all comatose, who are like comatose with this happy thing. They're not dead. What do you do with them? Like, how do you treat that? Like, there's not enough hospital rooms to put everyone in the country in a hospital, to give them the fluids or nutrition that they need. So like the idea, like in my mind was, I was picturing a couple of guys throwing living people in this condition into a refrigerated truck. Like, just, you're a biohazard at this point. Like, I was like, that was the horror for me, was like, oh man, like the internal struggle of these workers who are trying to clear out these bodies, but they know they're not dead, but there's literally no hope for the infected individual. Like, I was like, that's horrible.
Yes.
But where it ended up was, after a cure was found, the people who they brought out of that coma had so much pleasure and had so many of these pleasure nerve cells burned out that they were unable to experience pleasure. And what does that look like? Like, how horrible is that existence? How do you get that person to get out of bed and eat something or brush their teeth or do any kind of motion at all, right? Because if there's no reward system, there's no reason to breathe. Like, there's no reason to get out of bed. So it's like, how does that work? How can you keep these people going who can feel no pleasure at all?
Yeah, that's an interesting conundrum. And I don't think that's been tackled much. Obviously, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley talks about how by stimulating people, giving them little ephemeral pleasures, they'll allow anything to happen to them. That's a different kind of commentary. I mean, yours sort of brushes upon that, but your scenario is a lot more extreme than that.
Yeah. I don't want to give away too much here, but it's something that they definitely struggle with at the end of the book, like how they're going to take care of those very, very few who received an antidote and they can now feel no pleasure at all.
Right. That's super difficult, because that burnout is kind of what, like you said, addicts are dealing with. So basically everyone is kind of in that situation. And as we know, a lot of addicts are not super functional members of society. You know, we should be looking at it, I think, many ways it's a medical condition or whatever. But in this situation, yeah, that's horrifying. I guess the good thing about when everyone's in their pleasure coma is the thing we always say with somebody dying, like, well, they didn't suffer. So, it's almost like I could see there being an argument made of just, well, let them die. They're not having a bad time. What does it matter? Like, you got to go out somehow.
Right. Or it's like, I did a short story in one of my books where, and the story was featured a couple of guys arguing at the back of one of these refrigerated trucks, like, we got to throw them in, they're a biohazard. No, they're still alive. Like, what do we do? And the argument's like, well, do they have any hope? Right? Do you have an IV? Do you have a feeding tube? Do you have anything with which to treat these people? No. So he's going to be dead in 72 hours. Do you want to come back in 72 hours, or are we going to put him on the truck? Like, it's like, damn.
That's a fair argument. Yeah, I could see there'd be elements of society that would argue one thing and others another. That's an interesting scenario that's playing out. Huh. Yeah. I mean, I can't help but draw societal commentary on that, whether you did it on purpose or not. And frankly, a lot of messages in books are not even necessarily put there by the authors. It's just kind of like the readers are going to take what they want from it. But I do think of a world today where we do have more pleasure sources than we pretty much ever had, yet people are not happier, is what they claim. And maybe it's because, in a sense, we're burning out our pleasure receptor. Even if we're not literal junkies, we might be for certain things that we might not, food, whatever, or social media and stuff like that, or people on the phone or whatever. So that's still like, that's a really relevant thing to think about. And why is it we're always chasing pleasure? It's our natural response. And if we lose that, we don't feel like we want to live anymore. But some philosopher, I can't remember the name, I was trying to look it up and I wasn't able to find it again. He claimed that we are not actually seeking pleasure at all. We're just trying to avoid pain, which I thought was really interesting. I don't think that those are mutually exclusive, so that's maybe not as deep as it sounds, but it did get me thinking. What do you think about that idea?
There's a lot of like, that lizard brain where it's just like, nope. Some of that came up when I was looking at tickling. Like, it's the same thing, right? And there were some folks that were putting out that like laughing is a societally conditioned response to tickling. Like, it's like you're laughing because you're uncomfortable with the situation, instead of like because it's actually, making you laugh. And it's a loss of control, lizard brain, like, I gotta get away and make this stop kind of situation. And that, I think that touched on what you were saying. Like, it's like, we're avoiding the pain of it more than anything else.
Yeah, the tickling. I think there is like a whole movement, an anti-tickling movement. I mean, I guess if that's what people want to, worry about. But yeah, I think the idea of like in the past, you take a little kid, you're like, and they're laughing. It does seem there's probably some of it is just a natural response, because even certain animals seem to do that. But still, forcing that on somebody, I think the argument is fair that forcing something physical on somebody who doesn't want it obviously is not cool. But another thing I think of in terms of the pleasure pain thing, scratching a mosquito bite, right? I mean, at first it is pleasure.
Oh, that's a good one.
And then it fucking hurts, but you're like, I still got to do it or whatever. So you have to just make yourself not do it. It's hard.
Right. I wonder if there's a dopamine response there where it's like,
I would guess, and I don't know what that is, or there's definitely no real benefit to us doing that, but not everything, I guess, has a evolutionary benefit. But I think it's just we're stimulating the skin for a second in a different way, and it's getting away from the itch. But then the skin is like, now I'm inflamed, it's going to hurt even more.
But that inflammation is like a response to a pathogen. So like maybe there is
you're getting it out of your, maybe you're rubbing it out of your
You're
skin.
drawing blood to the area and getting your body to like respond to whatever pathogen, I think it was like the mosquito saliva or whatever from whatever insect has like caused that reaction.
Yeah, the irritation. So wait, well, why is medical? They're always saying don't scratch. So we should start a movement where we say scratch that,
it, man.
It's good for you. The big pharma's telling you not to scratch. You should scratch that.
Go ahead, scratch it. To a point.
And then another obvious thing. I mean, you did mention sex, and then if you think of horror stuff, so Clive Barker, so the BDSM world is the obvious pleasure pain crossover there. So the question is, maybe is there even that much of a difference? Or is it just a blurring? Do they kind of meet? Like when people become really extreme on the left and really extreme on the right, they tend to meet. That's sort of what pleasure and pain can do.
Well, and one of the things that's like the human brain can like you hear about people who have had accidents and brain damage, like learning to use other areas of their brain to do the jobs of the damaged areas. So you gotta wonder, like, if you're using that pain area, like if you're talking about like the BDSM world, if you're using that pain area for pleasure, does it eventually wire that way? Like, are you wiring yourself for that dopamine response, even though you're triggering those pain neurons? Like,
I'm sure there's something to that. I don't know enough to comment on it. It's not exactly my forte or my area of knowledge, but I think that's probably true, right? I mean,
right?
How could that not be true?
Well, we're fiction. We're authors. Like, we can go ahead and just make stuff up about it.
Yeah, no, but I think that I'm sure if we look that up, I'm sure there's been studies about that. And so there is that kind of thing where that's what porn does to people. So porn, you keep upping the threshold, and that's why so I've heard. I mean, if I've researched it solely for my fiction writing, of course. Like everything is like stepchild sex in the US. It's like, what the fuck is that? And it's because, I'm bored of this, I'm bored of this, I'm bored of this. What's the next taboo? I'm not going to make a judgment statement one way or another, but I think that is eventually where it's going to go more and more.
I looked at that a lot because that actually, like, when you started looking at pleasure, pain, and dopamine, like the biggest hits on like internet searches were porn addiction and social media addiction, and they work the same way as drug addiction in terms of the dopamine response. So you're inducing an emotional stimuli instead of a direct chemical stimuli, but the result's the same. You're looking for that next dopamine hit, right? And like, so the porn one, you're climbing up this ladder to get there. The social media one is like, how many likes, or whatever, like just looking for that next thing. But it's the same thing. You're flooding the system with dopamine. You're burning out those receptors. You then need more and more to get to the same place. And that pleasure seeking behavior turns into like this, like, atavistic need where
and it can ruin real life intimacy. So what they're finding, particularly with young men, is especially the ones who kind of grew up with porn. Luckily for me, I mean, it was like Playboy magazines you had to actually look through. It doesn't have the same power. But so there's young men with erectile dysfunction because normal sex is not as appealing to them because they've been so hyper conditioned by porn. So the irony is they're chasing this pleasure of this imaginary thing. And then when the real life, good, awesome thing of real sex happens, they can't even appreciate it. How ironic is that?
Yeah, no, it's terrible. And like the good news on that, like when you look at the neurology of the thing, is that just like with drug addiction, a period of abstinence resets it.
Good.
Like that's, and it's not a long thing. When I can't remember. It was like a matter of weeks, I think, when I was looking at it.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, like,
So it comes back. You just have to have that willpower to sort of step away for a little while. But if you're habituating it's just your thing, I think most people they don't have that willpower or whatever.
so I would posit that it's probably the same for like social media, and the chemical ones are however long that you got to deal with the behavior and the chemical addiction too. But
Right.
yeah,
But
it's
hope is what you're saying.
yeah,
We don't have to fall into these dopamine pleasure rat traps. There's a way out if we choose, but why do so few people take the way out?
you gotta put on your big boy underpants and quit. Like,
That's hard to do. Whatever it is, whatever your vice or your addiction or just your pleasure thing. And I'm certainly not here to say pleasure is bad, right? Be an ascetic, even the Buddha realized the stories of the Buddha is he was living a hedonistic life because he was the son of a prince or whatever. He was a prince. And then he decided to be an ascetic, completely depriving himself. He realized neither of those extremes made sense. So kind of finding that middle path.
right, that's the trick. It's funny. Like, I'm a middle-aged person now, and I was thinking about this when I was preparing to talk to you today. Is like, because like I've had those struggles. I think that's like sort of where some of the genesis for the books came out of, was like with sugar and THC and caffeine and nicotine, and your body, like at a certain point, your body's like, dude. And I was just thinking, like, middle age, like the things that start happening to you at middle age, like when you're engaged in all those behaviors when you're younger, it's like, I got plenty of time. I'll take care of that later. And like at middle age, your body's like, guess what? It's later.
So even if you don't overcome the stuff when you're younger, if you survive, then the older age or the more maturing process is going to maybe temper your drive a little bit.
There are consequences.
And you feel them, which you wouldn't necessarily notice when you're younger. So, well, that's also, I guess, positive, right? So there's a way out. We don't have to end up living the nightmare that is in your book, but people should definitely read your book. But to wrap things up, it's been great to have you on this topic. This has been a real fun one. What are you working on now, and where can folks find your work?
The Unrecovered is available wherever ebooks are sold, pretty much. The paperback, I think the paperback is wide. I can't remember. I know it is wide, but it's on the big A.
Mm-hmm.
And the pull is just on the big A for right now, but I'm going to release a second edition, which is how you get it off of there and send it wide. So hopefully this fall, the second edition of the pull will be available everywhere. Right now, I'm writing the second novel in the Unrecovered Smiling Flu series, and then I've already got the second book in the pull series outlined, and folks can get 2 novellas on my website at lenmruth.com for free, Rachel's Apocalypse Diary. And that's also in the Smiling Flu world.
Awesome. All that sounds really awesome. Thank you so much, Len, for coming into my nightmare.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for taking a trip with me through Josh's worst nightmare, where I, Josh Schlossberg, survey the dark landscape of biological horror fiction presented by Denver Horror Collective. If you don't want to miss any of the great, and sometimes disturbing, weekly episodes I've got planned for you, be sure to subscribe to Josh's Worst Nightmare on a variety of podcast platforms. You can also sign up for Josh's Worst Nightmare e-newsletter at joshsworstnightmare.com, where I share a whole squirming mess of bio-horror, including my infamous haiku horror reviews and my latest dark scribblings. Speaking of which, if you haven't already picked up a copy of my cosmic biological folk horror novella, Maline, from D&T Publishing, you can find a copy of the paperback, hardcover or ebook at Amazon, godless.com, or joshsworstnightmare.com. Yours darkly, Josh Schlossberg.